Covert Persuasion, Psychological Tactics and Tricks to Win the Game by Kevin Hogan and James Speakman. I don't think he's related to the action star, but this is from, let's see, I think this is like 2007 or so. 2006 is when this was published. And I always like to get the hardback books of stuff like this because this is one of those that I keep handy because there's a lot of fascinating information in this. I find books like this fascinating probably for totally different reasons than what the authors intended. What this is a kind of a how-to psychological warfare manual for salespeople. That's the intended audience of this. But if you're like me and you're just fascinated with the way the human mind works, and you're fascinated by the way people are persuaded into ideologies or into thought processes they would normally not go into, or groupthink, so to speak, this is a fascinating study in that. This is kind of a mashup of hypnotic techniques, just blatant suggestion, body language, NLP. It's all mashed up in here. And again, this is a how-to book. This is literally instructions on how to convince people of various things. And there's a lot of it's good advice as far as if you are in any kind of sales or things like that. There's a lot of good sales information in there. But again, from a bigger picture perspective, there's a lot of this too that really helps you see the way people process information. And it's also interesting. I think there's a lot of people that have a very naive view that people don't think this way, that there are not, that I think the general public doesn't like to think that there are people who write whole books on how to get inside someone's head and make them do something they don't want to do. So anyway, lots of good information in this, and I might follow up with this sometime and just go through some of the points in here. But I'm just going to cover one example that I find especially relevant to some of the other books that I've covered here. There's a whole section in here. I say a whole section. It's a kind of an article or a very short chapter on storytelling and about the why of storytelling. And that's something I think a lot of people don't think about when they go into storytelling mode and tell their friends or their family a story. Why are they telling them that story? What's the purpose? What motivated them to tell it? What's its impact on its audience? And they really get into this psychological mechanism of storytelling and how effective that is at changing people's perspective, and how it can also work contrary to that. If you're not careful, storytelling can have the adverse effect. But they have a really fascinating section in here on how powerful storytelling is. And it really, things like this, that section alone is a really important bit of wisdom to remember when you're watching broadcast television or you're watching movies, and to remember that nobody just tells a story just to tell a story. There's always a message, there's always a meaning. And it's not, it may not be immediately clear to you, the person enjoying that entertainment, but there is always going to be a message, and that is the very point of storytelling. It may not be a message that you agree with. In fact, it may run counter to your morals completely, but there is always a message embedded in that story. And it's important to note that when you sit down to take in a movie, that puts you into a very passive state, and you're willing to absorb information in that passive state uncritically than you would normally have in a conversation. If someone is talking to you about something controversial, you're more inclined to stop them and maybe double check the information or ask them why they think a certain thing. But when you're hearing something in the format of a story, you retreat into this kind of passive state where you just absorb that, and you do that typically uncritically. And the act of storytelling as it pertains to movies and film and television is really powerful and really has done a bang-up job of shaping the culture as we know it today. So anyway, I digress about storytelling, but that's an important component to there. And one more little thing about suggestion in this. I do this as kind of an experiment in suggestion because there's certain magic tricks that I do that rely on techniques of suggestion. And when you start to understand how the human brain works to kind of fill in these gaps, when the human brain sees certain things, you immediately start filling in the blanks and think that you see or perceive something that maybe you didn't perceive at all. And one little experiment that I do whenever I'm out traveling, I used to use a business credit card that was not in my name, and very clearly not in my name. And it was all legit, but when you're using a business credit card at a car rental place, they will not let you rent a car if the business card or the credit card does not say your name, the name that's on your license. If it's not on there, they will not honor that. So I'm trying to find some pieces of ID and stuff that won't give away personal information. But one thing, I'll just do this example with a couple of business cards. One thing that I do, one thing that I found, because I would have to rent a car occasionally or get a hotel, and some places were real picky about if your name was not on the credit card, they would they would shut you down right there and say, hey, it's got to match. So I found a great example of suggestion, and try this if you're in a position to do this, and do so honestly. What I would do is I would hand them, say, this is my credit card that's in a totally different name. Say, this is John Smith, and this is my credit card with my name, which is obviously not John Smith. And so I've got my driver's license that says my name. I've got the credit card that says John Smith on it. These are very obviously conflicting pieces of identification. And what I would do, and I started doing this after reading Walter Boert's Mind Control book he had a really good section on suggestion in there. So I started trying this of just taking the two cards together and handing them to the clerk together. And I was amazed, and try this as a social experiment if you get a chance, because I would hand these to the clerk, and again, very clearly different names, and they would take them from me, look at them, and then hand them back. And even though they pantomimed the motions of looking at both cards and handed it back, the fact that I handed them together kind of created this short circuit in their brain. Again, the suggestion is so powerful of, why would you hand me two things that don't match? That doesn't make any sense. So your conscious mind is overridden by your subconscious mind that says there's absolutely no reason someone would blatantly hand you two things that don't match unless they did. So I was always amazed. I never had one person, when I presented it that way, I never had anyone go, these don't match, this is a different name, find me the right credit card. So again, use that with the appropriate tact as a social experiment. I don't recommend doing anything dishonest with that information, but that's a great example of how powerful suggestion is when presented in the right way. That you could have someone literally look at two different things, but their critical mind is overridden by their subconscious. So anyway, I go way off course to tell you that, but Covert Persuasion is a fascinating book, and he obviously doesn't tell you how to present credit cards and such like that, but lots of good information. And again, I am approaching this not as a sales guy as much as someone just fascinated with the human mind. So if you're into that, this is an easy book to find. I think this is one you can easily find on Amazon, probably used bookstores and whatnot. But again, Covert Persuasion by Kevin Hogan and James Speakman.